Against standard backspin, we use a standard push. But if you use that same technique on a half-spin ball, it will pop high. The most difficult service return is against that awkward, half-long, tricky spin ball. It's a ball with an awkward length and unclear spin. Today, we're going to solve this problem. First, on the backhand side, when facing these awkward short balls, a simple push often pops the ball high. This half-spin ball is hard to attack, and because the spin is hard to read, your pushes are prone to error. The solution is to push not just forward to clear the net, but also sideways to keep the ball from popping up. Watch this demonstration. The key is to move both forward and to the side. When you can't read the spin, aim your return towards the center line of the table. Many amateur serves have deceptive motions. If you can't read it, your return must have both a forward and a sideways component. Here's the principle: if you only push forward, you need a perfect read on the spin. By pushing sideways, you are effectively lowering the ball's trajectory. With these half-spin balls, a standard push often pops up, and an aggressive long push easily goes off the table. So, aim towards the center line for a controlled, low return. The same principle applies to long serves. Direct your motion towards the middle and to the side. Because moving sideways also brings your racket down, you can effectively control the arc. Remember, use this technique only when you can't read the spin. If you have a good read, use your normal return. The second scenario is returning a ball with heavy sidespin and underspin. To ensure consistency, we should use a soft push rather than a passive block. A block is a very small, passive motion, whereas a soft push actively sends the ball forward. However, a ball returned with only a soft push will have less spin and won't create difficulty for the opponent. So, without adding friction, we need to make the return more dangerous. A soft push is slow. But if you want to make the return sharper, you must accelerate your forearm. By accelerating your forearm slightly, the returned ball will be both fast and heavy. Take your soft push, but accelerate your forearm through contact without brushing the ball. This will create a fast, jamming return. If you try to brush a heavy backspin serve, you'll misread the spin, the ball will slip, and it will go into the net. A faster, jamming return makes it difficult for your opponent to recover and position, giving you the advantage if they can't loop it directly. The danger is facing a skilled player who can loop your return with heavy topspin, which is very difficult to handle. Let me demonstrate with a penhold grip. Amateurs must understand, the more you try to brush a heavy spin serve, the more likely it is to dive into the net. Use a soft push with a forward forearm motion to guarantee the ball gets on the table. If your opponent can't loop it, just continue with the soft push. If they can, add forearm acceleration to your soft push, still without brushing. With forearm acceleration, the ball becomes very heavy and difficult to loop. The final case is a sidespin topspin serve. You cannot push this ball. You must hit or flick it. If someone tells you they can push a sidespin topspin serve, it simply means the serve didn't have enough spin. A true sidespin topspin cannot be pushed down. Now, let's address the short forehand return. Should you flick this ball? Let's watch a push first. See how easily this ball pops up? Some players use a big motion to serve a no-spin ball, not for an ace, but to set up an attack on your weak, high return. If you try to flick what you think is topspin, it goes in the net. If you try to push what you think is backspin, it pops up. This happens because most serves have ambiguous spin. Most amateur serves aren't pure sidespin topspin or sidespin backspin. They are usually somewhere in between. So, for this kind of ball, what's the correct way to push and the correct way to flick? Against standard backspin, we use a standard push. But if you use that same technique on a half-spin ball, it will pop high. For any quality forehand push that stays low, your racket must make contact from a position above the ball. Regardless of the serve's height or speed, if your racket starts above the ball, your push will never pop up. For a half-spin ball, as long as I raise my racket and contact the ball on the lower half of my paddle, it will never go high. At worst, I might use too much force and it will go long. However, if you contact the ball in the center of the racket with a downward pushing motion, it's guaranteed to pop up. The downward motion, without proper friction, will cause the ball to jump upwards off your racket, resulting in a high return. This isn't an issue with heavy backspin, because the ball's natural downward trajectory helps keep the return low even when contacted in the middle. However, if the serve is half spin, contacting it in the sweet spot will cause it to pop up. Simply opening your racket angle won't fix it. Even with a vertical racket face, a center contact will still result in a high ball. So, unless the ball has heavy backspin, you must contact it on the lower half of your racket. The lower the contact point on your racket, the better. Then, execute your downward pushing motion. As long as I can get my racket up and chop down on the ball, even with a flat racket angle, I can keep the return low. You don't even need to adjust your racket angle, a relatively flat angle will work. As long as I use the lower part of my racket, I can control the ball, even if the serve has no spin at all. The main mistake amateurs make is dropping their racket too low, causing contact in the middle or upper part. Then, the downward push fails to grip the ball, and it pops up. With a backspin serve, the opposing forces of the spin and your push cancel each other out, keeping the trajectory low. Always raise your racket. Don't scoop from below. Use the lower part of your racket to chop down on the ball. Previously, we said to open your racket for no-spin balls. That's because even with an open face, we were still contacting the ball on the lower half of the racket. A student asked why his return still popped up even with an open racket. It's because his racket was too low. An open racket with a central contact point will still fail to grip the ball and it will pop up. You must get your racket up, especially for those sidespin serves that kick up after the bounce. Find the high point, get in position, and then execute your push. Now let's talk about the flick. You can flick these half-spin balls. To flick a half-spin ball, your racket angle must not be too closed. Contact the back of the ball and use your forearm to generate speed. In the flick, your wrist is for creating the arc. Your forearm is for generating power and speed. Using only your wrist is not enough. You must follow through with your forearm after making contact. After making solid contact, drive your forearm forward. For these half-spin balls, don't flick downwards. You must flick forward through the ball. This type of flick, when aimed at the corners, creates a very difficult rhythm for your opponent to handle. For all short court shots, including the push, relying only on your wrist limits your power. You need the forearm to generate speed. During the flick, your forearm must continue moving forward. If you stop on contact, the ball will be slow and your opponent will smash it. Therefore, you must drive your forearm through the ball to generate speed. The flick is primarily a forward-hitting motion, not a brushing motion, unless you are flicking a very heavy backspin, which I don't recommend. Against heavy backspin, a sharp, long push is much more effective, as it uses the opponent's spin against them. The flick has minimal brushing. It's about driving the forearm forward. Keep your wrist firm, don't let it be too loose. A floppy wrist will take over the function of the forearm and you'll lose power. Keep your wrist stable and let your forearm drive the wrist forward through the ball. This is how you generate enough speed on your flick to overwhelm your opponent. Another reason for a weak flick is that your racket is too close to the ball. You need space to generate power. You must create some distance from the ball to allow your arm to extend. If you're too close, you can only push it. Power requires space. However, against a kicker hook serve, creating space will cause you to flick the ball long. For those deceptive topspin serves, you must stay close to the ball and use a closed racket angle to press down on it. For a standard serve, create distance and flick through it aggressively to generate speed. Remember, speed requires space. Without space, it just becomes a push. Flicking forward through the ball is a very consistent shot, unlike flashy wrist flicks which are unreliable. This push flick is the most stable way to handle short balls. When you flick, don't retract your forearm. Retracting it ruins the arc, slows the ball down, and removes spin. It's much better to drive forward. A flick with a retracting arm is too slow and invites an attack. So, always push forward with your flick. To summarize, against heavy backspin, prioritize the push. Trying to flick it is low percentage and gives your opponent an easy ball. You can flick half spin or no spin balls by driving forward. Your choice between pushing and flicking depends on your opponent's strengths. If they are good at looping backspin, you must flick to turn the rally into a topspin exchange. Third, for the kicker hook serve that jumps at you, you cannot push it down. Your only option is to get close, close your racket angle, and essentially press the ball down onto the table. If you try to flick it from a distance, it will go long. So, use the push flick for half spin balls, and use the press flick for those heavy topspin serves that you can't push and that fly off the table when you flick. Always prioritize pushing against backspin. Flicking it up is just like giving them a high ball to smash, so it's better to push it long and heavy so they can't attack it.